So, hey, listen, we're live to tape right now. So if anything goes wild and crazy, we'll have time to like cut it, snip it, trim it.
We won't, so.
I mean, look, we do have a lot going on, but it's going to be okay. We're very happy to have like 45 minutes, an hour, a little time to kick it with Malaika Jabali, The Guardian, BBC. You've done a lot of stuff. I can't count like all of the places that you've had various bylines and outlets in. You were on Very Smart Brothers for a while. You've just done a lot of very good stuff. And also, like, generally when people think of, and I think I mentioned this when we talked earlier, when people think about people who do journalism, they think of extremely long form journalism. And I think that it's a talent to be extremely to the point in like a medium-sized format. And you're somebody that has like such a way with words that you can kind of cut through a long space of paper and make it something that's very impactful. So, hey, it's good to have you on the show at long last.
Thanks for that. And thanks for having me. I'm glad you invited me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you've got a piece, and I was quoted for maybe like a couple of lines of this piece. 99% of it was your great work. In Atlanta, a race to kiss the ring of police, and we're just talking about the situation in Atlanta. We've obviously got an election coming up. It's election season. Everybody is excited about, well, who are we voting for this year? But I think that in Black communities specifically, but really in the South as a whole, I think there's a lot more discussion this year about like, what are we voting for? And those two things can kind of come at cross purposes when there's like election and there's going to be one or two outcomes. Just kind of some people kind of pumping the brakes and saying, what policies are we putting into place during this election? In Atlanta, we had a very contentious district attorney's race that was in the background of some police violence over the summer. Can you talk about your experiences with the stuff that went down in Atlanta over the summer?
Sure. I was a spectator like a lot of people were. I'm originally from the metro Atlanta area. Grew up there. I'm a Southerner, so I identify with both the calls that a lot of grassroots organizers have been making to hold politicians accountable in in Atlanta. Particularly, it's complicated by the fact that Atlanta is known for having this kind of Black excellence title, being like a vanguard of having like Black elected officials and Black mayors and things like that. But then I also saw this sort of Black bougie response to police violence, where you have even hip hop stars, T.I., Killer Mike, some other people who were trying to sort of tampen a lot of the non-peaceful protest and the more radicalized versions of protests that were happening in Atlanta. So when I saw that Paul Howard had actually prosecuted the Garrett Rolfe, the cop who killed Rayshard Brooks, I was a little bit surprised. And then I saw that there was this DA race happening. So I went in the aftermath of all of, the arson that happened at the Wendy's. But I'm also familiar with that neighborhood because I went to church just like 10 minutes away from University Avenue, the Wendy's where Rayshard was killed. And so I'm somewhat familiar. It's like Peoplestown near Mechanicsville. Yeah. Like that's about like where it's at. And I grew, my second home was kind of like the West End, which is just two neighborhoods over. So I was like, I got to go home and see what's going on here, especially because I have contacts with activists who work in that area, community movement builders. I covered them for a previous story. I grew up in the Malcolm X grassroots movement, and Kamau Franklin, who runs community movement builders, has been a part of the Malcolm X grassroots movement. So it's almost like it's like a family event. So right. I needed to go home and like see what's really happening with this race and what's happening with the community.
Were you surprised by, and Kamal's like a mutual acquaintance of both of ours. Were you surprised by how like on edge people were at university? Because like it definitely, at least during the time that I was down there, it was just everybody was very nervous and everybody was very worried about police reprisal, and there'd already been a lot down there.
I was a little bit. It was hard to get, other than Kamal, maybe a couple of other people, it's hard to just get people's names. Folks didn't want to tell me who they were affiliated with, even when they had presented publicly, like they were on the PA system out of the megaphone and they were talking. And I was just like, hey, can you tell me who you're part of? I'd like to cover you. Like, no. Please don't. And it's understandable, because while I was there, I went to a rally. I want to say it was August 29th. It was whatever Saturday that last Saturday in August was. I went there and there was a helicopter that had hovered overhead. And by that time, it had pretty much wound down. There was only about a dozen people. So there was a helicopter overhead. I saw two cops like catty corner across from the warehouse where the rallies have been taking place. And then up past 9 o'clock, there was a white van that had been stationed there for a really long time. And then when I talked to you, Brandon, I found, well, you were the one who said that over the the Atlanta police scanner Twitter account, they were saying that Homeland Security was actually there. So there is a lot of heavy surveillance in that area. And I was concerned that they were going to follow me home. Like there was a lot of surveillance.
No, like, listen, I was at a protest at the Kemp Mansion, which is like the governor's house, and we were across from there. And the amount of, and I've got footage of this that I posted on my Twitter and a few other places, like they sent the National Guard out, and there was literally like a row of like combat vehicles that were surrounding the governor's mansion. And most of these people, this was not like the Black Panther movement was out here at the governor's mansion. Like I would say like 20% of the crowd was like white women wearing Stacey Abrams shit. So they got like a dose of the real world, like, and people were very shocked, because unless you have like a history of being into that, you don't appreciate the volume of the state's response to those kind of situations.
Right. Yes, it's very intense.
Yeah. We were, I mean, all summer long, we were either with or in contact with the protesters, and it was just story after story after story after story of the police literally trapping people just to tear gas them, and trapping people just to like beat them down, and really doing just this incredible extensive violence to protesters for, you know, the crime of being there at all. And I think so many people really missed that part of the engagement, you know, that this was such a police-driven conflict, you know, that it was continuing because the police just would not stop brutalizing people. And the more they doubled down, the more people came out to protest. And that side of it, I feel like, vastly was overlooked, you know, and especially like local media coverage here.
News media coverage of this entire thing was so outrageous. Like, they were literally searching the gutters for like things that were bottles, so they could say this could have been thrown at someone. Like it was some of them, or when there was like the military hardware on the streets, they were like doing slow pans over it and fawning over it. Like they were trying to sell this stuff to people via eBay or like it felt like we were on Home Shopping Network. Listen to these people go through the military hardware that was like on their streets to pay for.
Keep dangerous hordes away from your McMansion. Like just ridiculous stuff.
And that's really what motivates me a lot. I'm not into like the ambulance chasing and trying to get the immediate like aftermath of a protest, or, you know, the things leading up to it, even though kind of by chance that's what ends up happening, because police violence is a constant threat. But at the same time, I really do think that it's important I consider myself more of a movement journalist. I think it's important for us to actually find ways to counter mainstream narratives, because when you go out there, you find so many details and nuances and counter narratives that is not being discussed in mainstream news media. Like you wouldn't know unless you had somebody who cared enough about Lady A, she's Richard's sister. If you didn't care enough, that the police were treating her like a criminal as well, where they've been following her, according to her statements to me, they've been surveilling her. She's had folks like constant police surveillance, and we don't get these details because there is a certain narrative that is being attempted through most of our mainstream media outlets.
And those protests were entirely peaceful. And in fact, they would stop. I mean, this was like a situation where they would literally stop things that were getting too like lit and telling people who were there that so there was no like, oh, they're doing this and that. It literally was that amount of reprisal just based on them like exercising their right to assembly.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to add this quickly too. But I was in Kenosha actually when Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed those two protesters. I heard it. I was just a few blocks away when it happened. And I think actually when I interviewed you, it was the same week. So that was about 3 or 4 days after that. And so it's pretty intense. It's almost like you are in a war zone. And before that happened, several hours before, and we might have discussed this over the phone when we talked, I was attending another rally that had happened during the afternoon, and there is a lot of an outpouring of support like kind of throughout the Midwest region because people are seeing just how dire the circumstances is for Black people out here, not just police violence, but what's underlying a lot of the reaction and the response is economic conditions that are very severe. And at the rally that I was at earlier in that afternoon, Philando Castile's girlfriend, who witnessed him being killed by police officers, and her daughter that was with her in the car when this happened, like a truly traumatic experience, they were both at a rally. And so I was standing feet away from her, and she was kind of interrupting an encounter that was happening in a park, Civic Center Park, which is like the main park where a lot of police activity was happening across from the courthouse. And you really see the pain and the trauma that Black people have to endure for the most part, predominantly Black people, a lot of Black women have to endure because they're experiencing two traumas, not just seeing the violence and it happening to their loved ones, but also reliving the gaslighting that happens afterwards. And people coming up to her and saying, we have a right to kill people to defend our property. And so there are these white vigilantes on the other side and these mostly Black protesters on the other, and they're saying, these are our lives, and we need people to recognize that. So a lot of this stuff is, it's happening all over the country, and I forget why I even started going down this road.
We were talking about like the importance of creating more honest media representation of these.
Yes, and so you wouldn't know that there were so many, like quote unquote, like the Black people that they're surveilling, you wouldn't know that there are so many of them who have actually been trying to de-escalate situations. And so when they saw that there were these armed vigilantes coming over to the park, they were running ahead to try and quell everything, to calm them down. So these aren't people who are like itching for a civil war. That's the vigilantes.
And you see that when they go and they, in cities like Portland, and we're going to have Greg McKelvey to come on later on and talk about that. But the charges that they're reading off as these big deal federal charges are like someone put graffiti on a wall and the wall is federally owned. And so it justifies like literally snatch and grabs. And literally we had somebody who was in the Atlanta activist community who does organize protests and things like that. But when she got arrested, was just walking, was just in a march and was in the crowd. And as this stuff, they just sprinted at her and grabbed her specifically. I don't know whether it was somebody that had a grudge over something that happened in the past or whether it was coincidence, but like.
I mean, they literally have databases of our names. Like, and to think that the same people who are putting together like KeyWiki and also we already know are working directly with police forces are not also feeding those police information about who to look for. That's like ridiculous. Like, of course they are. Yeah. And like you said earlier, It's like a war zone. They're treating it like war. The rest of us are trying our very, very best to stop that from escalating. But these people are already there. In their heads, that is already where they are. This is a war. They are capturing political prisoners because we are resisting them in the real sense where we show up and do something about this, right? And there's no version of this where anybody gets involved, starts going to these protests, and comes out of it thinking the police are the good guys. Like, go to a single protest.
Well, and I think it's beyond just like to the political aspects. Like Brandon said, was this a targeted harassment thing is also a question, because these police departments, they've literally selected for like the type of individuals that it's like, it's your high school bully. That's who becomes a cop.
Yeah.
It's the people that were absolute like jerks to you, in like every realm of life. They go to the police force and they find themselves welcomed with that behavior.
Yeah. It's actively selected for, and it is such a moral atrocity that the people who are primarily in control of our predominant media sources are ignoring this, willfully ignoring this.
Yeah.
And that makes me very grateful for the work that, you're doing, and to be a part of the work that we're doing here, because somebody has to, right?
Thank you.
One of the cool things that we all have in common is that like we do have to like talk to regular people in our lifestyles or whatever. Like, it's not like we're all just hanging out and posting at all times, although I like to post. When you have conversations with people about stuff that you've witnessed in Atlanta, and it's good because you're kind of taking what we're going through and kind of exporting it to other people, is there incredulity? Is there surprise? Does everybody kind of have their own similar local story? How universal does Rayshard's situation feel to you as somebody that's covered a lot of this stuff across the country?
I haven't talked about this. I was kind of waiting until the piece actually came out. And so I haven't had a lot of those encounters, but definitely my experiences throughout the Midwest over the last few years that I've been covering it. And I think there is a sense of solidarity, but also surprise. And I think it also depends on what the subject and the source is. Because for one, since a lot of my work has featured the Midwestern Black working class, I think it's a surprise for people to even know that there are enough Black people in Wisconsin for this to be a story. Or the fact that you have, nearly 40% of the city of Milwaukee is Black, which is more than Chicago, more than Brooklyn, like a higher percentage, obviously not like in raw numbers, but a higher percentage than a lot of cities that we consider to be Black cities. So I think there's just surprise at that, but also the extent of, I think police surveillance is heard about. I think people know, but then when you actually go through the details, I think it still surprises me. And when you actually see it and you feel it and you taste it, like literally you taste the tear gas and you hear the sound grenades going off, it makes it a lot more visceral.
Yeah, listen, can we talk about voting? I want to come back. We'll take 30 seconds and then we come back. We'll talk about just what are some of the things that people have suggested in response to this. Around the time that Rayshard Brooks happened, there was a primary. There was a primary election. So this is a good time to talk about, as we're going into the general election, who's voting for what and what do they want to get out of this. So let's do it, and we'll be right back, and we'll maybe talk a little bit about the coming election and maybe some Ice Cube. I don't know. We'll be right back.
I don't know either.
I feel like as we're going into the election season, we've got a lot of man versus woman discourse on Twitter. And I know that Twitter usually is the place to do that 24/7. It's like the Thunderdome, but now it's like Thunderdome Election Edition. And I think that a lot of it has roots in what the value set is going into an election. Cube is in a lot of trouble, maybe partially rightfully, just for this whole I'm going to negotiate with both political parties to come up with some really good policy concessions 4 days before the election. I just feel like if you were really cued into things, you would have been kicking all this up on social media in January. That would have been a really good time, like before all of these votes happened, for like what the actual choices were. You could have been doing the exact same thing that you're doing now, especially because if you're on Twitter during primary season, you know ADOS was in your replies this entire time trying to get you to talk about reparations and trying to get you to talk about all these other political issues. I don't know what Cube was doing at that time, but now I feel like the cake is already baked with the election. But I don't know. You tell me. How do you feel about just in general the political demands and the whole Black agenda discussion like a week away from the election?
I feel like that's completely loaded because I completely agree with your assessment. The cake has been baked. If I would say that, you know, people's political consciousness may not arrive when we want to.
That's true.
And
that's
also,
a good point.
Also, you know, the church, the gospel song, he may not come when you want to, but he'll be there right on time. Ice Cube wasn't either. We didn't need it.
I thought you were going to go in the right direction. I thought you were going to go in the other direction and say, well, you know, it's always a good time to hold elected officials accountable. And we're just doing this fight 365 days a year so we can tag in whenever he feels like it.
Right. That could have been it, but that's not at all what Cube is doing, because I don't think it has a lot to do with trying to really speak to the demands of a community. I think he, you know, I think he did have counsel with some Black scholars who know what they're doing, because I read the plan and there are things in there that I recognize from Darity and Sandy Darity and Derek Hamilton. I'm like, okay, he's talking. I think he mentioned baby bonds somewhere. I don't remember seeing it in the plan, but right. But I know that he's associated with that. He's talked about reparations. He has talked about, you know, regulating the financial industry. I'm like, okay. But then when you hear him talk about his plan, he's actually quite libertarian. And so the issue is that it's a couple of issues, but one is that the things that he's actually suggesting and proffering runs counter to the way that he talks about politics. And so the way that he talks about politics is that we need to have small government. We need governments to get out of the way. But how do you regulate the financial industry? How do you regulate corporations? How do you make demands and then you tell them to get out of the way? That is inconsistent with anything that Black people actually need. We actually need massive transformative policy. We actually need systemic financial and economic programs. You cannot have that by just saying big business should take care of this or just give us money and that'll fix it. And the people that he's actually been in counsel with, people like Antonio, I think his name is Antonio Moore. I just know he's Tone Talks on Twitter. This guy with ADOS, like he was having this conversation with Ice Cube. And so I would say it's not, you know, his cake has been half baked and it's sloppy. So that's what I have to say about his plan. I've got other things to say about the other stuff though.
It kind of speaks to what you were talking about earlier about there's sort of like a bouginess, you know? And there's something we talk about a lot on the left, like class solidarity, like is most people's primary sort of community where they show solidarity. And I can't help but wonder to what extent it's sort of informed by that, you know, just like if you have enough money, you stop seeing the struggle of people who don't, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like he understands, because when I actually watch his interviews, it seems like somebody who is pained by the the struggles and the tribulations of Black Americans of all classes. Like I kind of feel that desperation coming from him, but I don't think he's in community with them. And if he were in community with them, he would know. And I have to even kind of take cues from really what the masses of Black people are saying, at least the ones who are very vocal. And that is, we just want to get rid of Trump at all costs. So I have to even kind of measure and temper like my leftism to an extent. And like, okay, you know, if that's the way y'all want to do it, that's the way y'all want to do it. But what are we doing on November 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th? What are we going to be doing in January 1st, 2021? So if Ice Cube, I think, was more in community with like Black organizers who feel this way, then I think he would have had a slightly different strategy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And going to Trump is not a strategy at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Platinum Plan in a second. But first, let me just ask you, how, when you talk about, you know, having that sense of community, are you using Facebook at all?
I use at all, yes, but minimally, because I found that for that demographic, it doesn't get very far.
That's literally what I was about to ask you. I was going to say, like, Black Facebook culture is very different from Black Twitter culture.
Yes, completely. And so my interactions are minimal, and I try and keep it with elders, quote unquote elders, people who are just like a little bit older than me, even like Gen X. And I try and be diplomatic, and you have more space to be diplomatic on Facebook. But at the same time, I think social media, period, is very limited, especially a week or two before an election. So when I say in community, I'm the co-chair of a grassroots organization called Operation Power, and we hold teach-ins, and we are trying to radicalize Black people 24/7. We have, you know, monthly meetings. We meet more than actually once a month now over the summer with the general public. And so that's what we have to do it, I think, from an organized, like with an organized strategy.
Can you tell us more about that org? Like, what are y'all doing? Like, I want to hear. I love hearing org stuff. So.
Let's wait, because I want to talk about the election. And so when we were able to talk a little bit about that context, I feel like we'll be able to talk about the context of Operation Power in a more holistic way. So to just keep it on our Twitter drama and discourse, we had a lot of discussion about like Black men and the patriarchy, and how much of Cube's discussion is from a patriarchal worldview. What's your just general feeling on just Black men on this nexus of, I remember Jamel Hill was just very upset this week, just saying 50 Cent's talking about Trump and so is Ice Cube, and Black men are from a different planet politically. Where do you weigh in on these relationships?
I don't think it's a different planet at all. I do think it's complicated. I think as Black people, we have experienced a lot of the same types of white supremacy. We've also experienced different types of white supremacy. And I just don't think we have managed to bridge the gap between the ways that we do experience it differently. And so on one hand, you do have Black men who are more harmed by our carceral state. Black women obviously are harmed, but just in terms of percentages and numbers and my encounters, and this is something I talked about briefly in the Rayshard Brooks article, I saw like my Black homies, like my guy friends who were harassed by police officers at an early age, who were targeted by like the punishment system at an early age. And it was more consistent. I've experienced my own sets of harassment from police officers being a Black person and being in Georgia, but it's still different, and it's not as much. And I think we should be comfortable acknowledging that. At the same time, Black women also experience sexism. So while I think the floor for Black men is lower, where there is I think there is a lot of state trauma, there's just more based on the data, more state trauma. the ceiling is also higher, where they do benefit from patriarchy, and they benefit from the fact that they are considered leaders more in our community, where they hold leadership positions even within our own organizations. And Black women tend to be relegated to kind of these rank and file workhorse roles within our organizations, and then because of sexism. So while our floor isn't as low, I don't think, our ceiling is also lower. So there is like less movement for us to just be to be elevated and succeed in the same ways, like within Black spaces. You know, I think the like kind of workplace culture can be a little bit different, because a lot of times Black women are elevated because we're seen as more, I think we're seen as safer. So I would just say that it's complicated. I don't think it's as simple as, oh, Black men are in a completely different world, or that Black men, you know, just have it harder. I think their hardship is just different, and it's also a little bit more publicized, and it's also more violent. But Black women also experience, you know, sexual violence and domestic violence and street harassment, and a lot of kind of daily microaggressions that are going to be different.
Do you feel? Go ahead.
I think that's sort of broadly true of the way patriarchy and sexism work, you know, as patriarchy and sexism, right? Like, it hurts both genders between men and women, and it hurts every gender in between, you know? And I think, like you were saying, it's happening and it's different, right? And I think that's a really important point to make whenever we talk about, you know, the influence of patriarchy on things, right? Like, it doesn't benefit men to be seen as dangerous, and it doesn't benefit women to be seen as weak, you know? And these things are just sort of both bad, and I think they can both be bad, you know.
Let's just kind of quickly talk about this. To what degree do you feel, what are your realistic expectations for a Biden administration if it comes in, specifically for Black people, but I guess for America as a whole? Do you feel like your expectations are just on the floor? And where do you feel like the average Black person has their sights set? And what do you think that we're expecting to get from Biden? Because it's really weird to me when I hear a lot of people talk about voting for Biden, especially older Black people. They do not really talk about any aspirations for that administration. Whereas I think that for Obama, there was a lot of aspirational discussion. And for Biden, it's just like, there will be a president. And that's what we're getting. Do you feel any sense of an aspirational aspect to Biden this election?
I don't feel that from the Black people that I've encountered in my reporting or in my personal life. The expectation for me it probably is similar to for the expectation for a lot of Black people, which is that we just don't want a president who is going to rally up white supremacists to harm us. And there is a lot that can happen, you know, underneath that. And I vary somewhat, because I think even without someone calling them forth and defending them in a debate, sort of, and defending people like Kyle Rittenhouse in mainstream news, even though, you know, those things may not happen explicitly, I think that faction has already been energized. I do think economic conditions affect it. Obviously, that is not the whole story. I think some leftists can be a little bit reductive in that sense. I don't think that's the whole story when it comes to the rise of fascism, but I do think it's a key piece. And unfortunately, a lot of folks miss that. I think, you know, a lot of the Black press misses that. I think they dismiss it outright. And so I don't think that is even going to go away with the Biden presidency, because we still have a potential president with Biden who's already said that he's not going to commit, or that it's I would say his associates, his senior advisors have already said that they can't commit to actually funding any of these grand FDR style programs that they've been harping on, that they've said, oh, we've been pushed left. Look at what we're promising. And they've been talking to Wall Street Journal reporters and saying, actually, we don't know if we can do this in the first place. So they're talking on both sides of their mouth. So I have very few expectations really for even a significant decline of a threat of white supremacy, which I think, and fascism, because I think that is the foremost concern that people have. That's a concern that I have. And I don't really know what to expect when it comes to that, but I don't have high expectations. I do think Black people in general will be relieved that we don't have someone who is signaling that and catering to it. But I don't have expectations that it's actually going to cease unless there's real economic relief, along with, being able to talk about, anti-racism education and whatever can minimize violence.
When we were talking about Cube and his maybe slightly playing footsie with Jared Kushner, one of the things that we talked about in Trump world was the Platinum Plan. I want to talk just about Black conservatism in general, like really quickly. How do you feel about, like, there is a cottage industry of Black people that are doing like the MAGA thing as a gimmick, and like a lot of these are people who you just know are had personal impact from conservative policy, and they're doing this kind of as a gimmick to get likes and retweets and stuff. And you're somebody who's a journalist. How do you feel about like Black conservative media personalities? To what degree do you feel like they're getting on a lifeboat, and to what degree do you feel like they're dragging down everybody else?
Getting on a lifeboat in terms of what?
Financially, do you feel like, well, this is just baked into the system. People do things for money.
Yeah, I don't really feel any type of way about them. I don't really pay them any mind. I don't think because I don't think that they're a real threat to anything. Most Black people aren't paying attention to them. I mean, even somebody like Daniel Cameron, who's been cozying up to Mitch McConnell. Folks, we recognize that. So they don't really have legitimacy, I think, for the average Black person. So I don't really feel any type of way about them. We've had Clarence Thomas, and even though Colin Powell is considered respectable, like we had a Colin Powell, we used to make jokes about him too, and a Condoleezza Rice. We've had, more respectable, I think, Black elected officials and personalities who aligned with the right, but they're not the first. And now they're just a little bit more gimmicky because I guess that's what works in this, media driven,
Right.
attention deficit driven climate. But the same types of ideology has existed, and most of us just aren't really messing with them.
Yeah, they've had a very uphill climb, and just looking at the numbers, I think that climb is going to continue. Hope the money's worth it, folks. Listen, let's take 30 more seconds, and I want to go way away from elections and stuff, and I want to talk about just your work, your history, and I want to talk about Operation Power. I love that me and Rachel were on the same wavelength and we know what we want to dig into.
Praxis.
So
Praxis.
Have you been saying that the whole time, Rachel?
Just chanting
the whole
that
time
for 30 seconds.
This is how you get amped up for the show. Listen,
Posting is not Praxis.
this election thing is going to happen. Even if it rains, it will still happen. November 3rd. And earlier in this interview, we were talking about like, what are people going to do on the 4th and the 5th and the 6th? For people who like are just into this and they're watching YouTube videos and they're like, I didn't even know there was a thing to do November 4th. I was going to have Taco Bell. What do you think that people should be doing that week after the election?
I think folks need to find an organization to be a part of, a grassroots organization that's talking about radical politics and radical direct action as well. My work is in radical electoral politics, as in electing folks who have been in the movement, training. It's a predominantly Black community, East New York, Brooklyn, training everyday people, working class Black people to, one, understand the systemic issues that have been failing us, that it's not just a Democratic and Republican problem. And in East New York, the majority of elected officials who get elected are Democratic, and the conditions have stayed pretty much static, until we have elected some Black or radical activists. So it's not just a partisan issue. This is an issue that comes down to us maintaining capitalism. And if you have politicians who maintain capitalism, once they get into office, they'll find ways to do that as well. So I could just take New York City as an example. The real estate lobby, developers are a huge industry here. They contribute to campaigns. You cannot really go against a real estate lobby if you want to win like citywide offices. It's hard to go against the financial industry and think that you're going to advance. And so we need people, and that affects the way that gentrification shapes up in New York City. Because if they're saying that, hey, we need subsidies in order to actually give you affordable housing, and we also need to make, X amount market rate, then we're not going to be able to develop any sort of affordable housing. And then when you push back on them and you say, no, this needs to be 100% affordable, somehow they find the money. But if you're not thinking about that, if you are only thinking about ways to benefit yourself, you're not going to come to those conclusions. You're going to align with whatever, development plan the mayor wants, which heightens, the amount of unaffordable market rate housing. That's just one example of how like radical politics can work. And so my organization, Operation Power, people organizing, not mine, but the organization I'm a part of, people organizing and working for empowerment and respect. We want to train elected activists, Black elected activists, to be thinking about those issues. So I think everyone needs to find some way where they can affect local and state politics, period. You have to affect local and state politics. We put so much attention on the presidential election. I'm not even talking about pushing Biden left or doing whatever. For the most part, I think that Congress and executive office is very limited as to how much we can do, because capitalism has steeped into like every aspect of our national politics, like every single one. Congressional races are going to be very, very hard. They require a lot of money. They require a lot of ground game. I think that's more feasible than trying to do anything related to pushing Biden left. I think you have a better chance of pushing a speaker of your legislative office, like your state legislature, or a mayor, than you do Joe Biden.
Yeah, and I mean, you also have your state senator, you have your city council person, and those are people who, if 20 people show up to one of their meetings, that's not happened to them for years. I do some calls with some activist groups that are in Atlanta that are a little older, and they literally, as we're coming up on the election, they're just like, we need somebody that knows how to use an iPad, who knows how to use like technology here, or just, we have a citizens review board in Atlanta for police shootings or just incidents where there's a complaint filed. And they have problems like getting young people to even go to those. And I mean, part of it is because like it's a toothless process, right? So you're not really getting anything out of going there. But also people who are not from Atlanta don't know that like that is something that a lot of other cities are actually fighting for, just for the opportunity to get air on some of these things. Because, if you run into police misconduct, and if you or somebody in your family is running into that, that it kind of goes into a rabbit hole once it happens, because there's no way to draw any further attention to it, because the police often control just that process of having something even be publicized. So even the ability to publicize something like is a rough power in some places, and it's something that you've got to fight for. So for Operation Power, what are some of the building blocks of your organization in terms of training Black electeds? Is this about like talking points? Is this about fundraising training? Is this about helping make calls? Do you give people money when they announce? What's the structure?
It's a little bit of all of that. So during election season, we have like a team of volunteers. So we have our own, like our Operation Power members and volunteers who go out there and do the petition. I don't know how it is in other cities, but we have to petition in order to get on the Democratic primary ballot. So just to get on the ballot for the Democratic primary, you have to have a petition and get enough signatures from that district in order to run somebody for any sort of campaign. So we have our volunteers. If somebody says, and we think that they should, be on like an Operation Power kind of ticket, we'll have volunteers to do that. And so we'll be on the train platforms. I've had to talk to many people like, what you got me signing? Are they a Democrat? That's usually the first thing our people ask. So we're out there in the cold. We out there at night. We're out there after work, out there early in the morning, and just get kind of an arsenal so that people have like a team of volunteers. But then we also do monthly trainings, public speaking. We have like negotiation workshops, just technical everyday things that people are going to need once you get out there and you have to battle people who don't necessarily have our same ideology. So for instance, we were active during the Akai Gurley shooting. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but it was the young man who was killed by a police officer in a nitrogen development. And that was actually in our district where Operation Power is. And our co-founder, Assemblymember Charles Barron, he's actually a former Black Panther Party member. And he also ran a workshop called Dynamics of Leadership. So he essentially works from that curriculum to instruct us for our meetings. And he's doing this for free. And he used to get paid like a gazillion, he got paid a good amount from colleges and institutions to do this. And he's doing this for us for free. And so I remember we did one action against the DA, Ken Thompson, excuse me. And he was supposed to like have actually tried to push for a conviction and a sentencing, and he didn't. So we rallied his fundraiser. So, I was like kind of in charge of this thing for the first time, got my megaphone. We went inside the hotel. We had some folks who were like more experienced, and they taught us how to do direct action, when to, proceed, when to fall back. We did some direct action. And then, so we have like an outside strategy and an inside strategy. And I could keep going. So I'm just going to wrap this up in like a second.
No, this is actually interesting. This is like what our show is about. So yeah, this is good.
Honestly, I'm like over here taking notes like, okay, this is how we can be doing it here.
Well,
So to close that up, we have like an inside and an outside strategy. So we understand, kind of the direct action and how do you talk in press conferences and how do you write press releases and things like that. But the inside strategy is on top of that. Once we protested twice or maybe a few times, but another time outside of the office of the judge who made the sentencing decision. And we ended up getting a meeting with like the ethics board. And so there's an ethics board that examines judge behavior. And we felt that the judge was unethical based on some of the statements that he made during the case. So we were sitting around with some leaders of the ethics board, and we had to know how to negotiate with them. We had to understand what are the talking points we need to have. What do we want to get out of it? Who's going to say what? So we kind of had to even choreograph that a little bit. Who's going to have the final say? Where are we even sitting? So when you're in a negotiation table, where do you sit? Because a lot of times you get some of these men who come in and they think they run it. And so you have to get the organizers, make sure you have an organizer sitting opposite them. So it's not just them who are heading, the table and calling the shots. So even little things like that about body language and posture and how do you assert yourself and make demands and be confident in that type of setting. So, that's just a sample of the type of work that we do.
What is the process for y'all, and to what degree is there a process for when somebody shows support for y'all when you are canvassing or you're calling? What's the process for getting them from that status of support to being more active and to really having a role in the work that y'all are doing?
We've created a database. So through every election, we have a database where we have folks who like maybe volunteer to be like a poll watcher, or they just they supported a candidate like through a fundraiser or things like that. And so we have a database of those folks and a database of people who have expressed interest in Operation Power directly. And whenever we have an event, we send it to both mailers. And so we, this is just, I'm getting into the weeds here, but we have 2 different databases, or actually 3 different databases on MailChimp. We make sure that when we're doing like a monthly meeting, we call it Liberation Saturday. When we do a monthly meeting, we send it to both mailers. Occasionally we'll call both of them because you already have their information from that. So we think of electoral politics as an organizing tool. So to get people from thinking about, this election once every year or once every 4 years to thinking about how can I engage on a regular level with my community and how can I think about systems change?
Let it be known, my eyes just like turned into hearts and shot out when you said we think of electoralism as an organizing tool.
Yes. I mean, and that is, literally how we do it. We take the folks who are interested in an election or a candidate, put them on our rolls and say, hey, we're also having a meeting. You should come. We're going to be talking about other issues you might care about.
Vanguard party.
Are you ever like surprised or unsurprised by how little Twitter drama crosses over into real life? People think of these things that we talk about on Twitter as like actual discussions that normal people have, but like think of the amount of discussion on Black men versus Black women on Twitter versus are they Democrats that you get in real life, which is like level this of engagement, which is just like, what is a Democrat? What does that mean? Are we supporting that? Like that's more, you run into that much more often.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised because I know what to expect with Twitter, which is also why I try and enforce like a Twitter limit. And I have my Twitter hiatuses or hiatusi.
Hiatus.
A lot of our friends make their phones lock them out after a certain amount of time,
Y'all gotta send me that app because I don't know that app because I just bypass the iPhone limit sometimes. I'm like, let me just see this mess anyway.
Yeah,
I will quite literally send you that app. Don't worry.
Please do. Yeah, so I'm not surprised because I think that is what Twitter is for. It is for debate. And I think just coming from like an activist practice perspective, and I've been an activist and I've been in an activist community basically all of my life because both of my parents were activists. There's only so much of that I can take. I'm an attorney, like that's my full-time job. And so I like debate, obviously. I enjoy it. And I think you just have to recognize that a lot of the debate that happens because people are bored and it's fun and not because it's actually useful. So I have to take a step back and say, okay, I got to get ready for this Operation Power meeting. I literally cannot be on here debating with y'all for 5 hours. And y'all aren't even going to read the links that I send you anyway. So what's the point?
That is the biggest mood of my life. I've started, honestly, when I'm online and like somebody starts trying to debate me, I just send them a link to the podcast and say, here's 100 hours of me explaining myself. Do your homework. I'm done. Like,
or I'll be like, okay, you know what? I'm about to write an article about this and I'm about to mute this thread.
Listen, like you're somebody who you have a generous following on Twitter, a well-earned following. Listen, at what stage did your Twitter life start getting weird? Like, when did you just say, this is not like a normal person's lifestyle interaction? This isn't how the human brain is wired to interact with people. Like, at what point did you just like, this is weird as hell?
I don't think it's gotten weird yet. I don't know. Like, is there anything that you've experienced that's been weird?
I think the fact that there are like thousands of people that follow us and Brandon is still sitting there like, yeah, but we don't mean anything until we hit 100K is weird. Like, I think that is weird.
I wouldn't say 100. I'd probably say like 30. I don't know. But we do. We do have both follower and we also have people who pick fights with us for like no reason. Both of those are really strange.
I mean, I guess it's not, it doesn't feel weird to me because I would say half, how old am I? Probably over half of my life now has been online, from these AOL chat rooms and, AIM to Black Planet, I used to have a screen name on an NBA message board where I used to argue with people all the time on ESPN back when they used to have that.
Yeah, back when they used to. I mean, it was still trashy, but it was very entertaining.
Do you remember the message board?
Yeah, the ESPN board. They moved it to Facebook because they were like, if we can get people to put their names behind these terrible comments, maybe there will be less. But it turns out it was like the same amount. People don't care.
Right, exactly. So I mean, I've been very online for a while, so I guess it just doesn't feel that weird, except now it's like it's me and not like a username. I'm not even gonna tell y'all what my ESPN name was because somebody might dig it up in the archives later. Um, so it's not being online isn't unusual, and it doesn't really translate a whole lot into my real world. Occasion and the things that do translate is usually from something that I write in the Guardian, where someone said something to me about I will never be able to shine Kamala's shoes just because I was like, she's not really doing enough for Black women. They're like, well, you'll never shine her shoes anyway. I was like, okay,
I don't want to shine her. I don't want to shine her Timbs.
and what's wrong with
she can shine her all Timbs.
Listen, so but it doesn't get that weird, not yet. I think 100K would do it.
I just have to say, I got into it with a few people about like the Nina Turner, John Kasich thing a little bit. Not like I wasn't like wildly upset or anything, but it was a discussion and I was slightly critical of the idea of platforming him. And so people were like, well, John Kasich would never go on your show anyway. And I was like, I would literally never, ever want John Kasich on my show. What are you talking about?
Not even for political reasons. He's a very boring man. I don't think I'd be able to stay awake for an hour with John Kasich.
Right? But also we agreed early on in this show, and I told everybody this that was like giving me a hard time. Like, of course you would want John Kasich. I was like, no, we agreed early on we would never bring on someone we hate. Just like just not to dunk on them, not for any reason. Like we're just not gonna do it.
Yeah.
So listen, we brought you on because this is one in a line of many very good articles. It's on Gin Magazine, which is gin.medium.com. And it's, in Atlanta, a race to kiss the ring of police. And we talked just a lot about the district attorney's race, which has just been a very interesting race. And through this article, people get a very good sense of what's going on in Atlanta, which I really appreciate because now I don't have to explain it to people. I can just point them to your article, which is what it's really all about.
Yeah,
so,
as you can see, I started with a quote from Brandon. Actually, that was my editor's decision to start off with that quote. I included it a little bit later at the beginning of a different section. It was like, nah, let's start with this as the frame. I was like, Brandon will appreciate that.
Listen, as a copywriter, I know when it's a dramatic frame. As I said it, I was like, that's a good opening. Let's see if I can get on there. Listen, yeah, absolutely. So listen, I hope that people will go and read it. And what else do you have going on that you want people to like?
Well, if people wanted some context for like a lot of the Midwest work that I've been doing, you could check out a short film I did called Left Out. And I'm in the Midwest now, probably for the next few weeks, if not several weeks, doing election coverage, but really focusing on the Black working class. I'm probably going to go to a protest in a little bit with some warehouse workers that's happening this later on today. But you can find that on YouTube. It's called Left Out, but go to bit.ly. So bit.ly/leftout2020, and it's all lowercase. And then to access this article, bit.ly, and that's bit.ly/ I think it's backslash, whatever the slash is that y'all be doing in URLs. bit.ly/GenMJ, and that's all caps. So GENMJ. For the Rayshard Brooks story. And I'm going to be doing this column. It's called Watching the Police every month for the next several months on Gen Mag. And each month is going to feature a different fight, a different battle between people who are fighting for some progressive or radical change to policing and those who are trying to battle them. So that is mostly it.
I love that we've got that. And we've got that on the screen. So anybody that's watching this, you can go down there, hit that bit.ly link, and go watch all that good stuff.
And follow me on Twitter, so my Twitter could get weird, and then I'll have some good stories for y'all. So
yeah, go follow, but try not to be a weirdo. And if you are a weirdo, don't say that you followed off of us.
Don't say don't use my name. Be weird on Malaika's Twitter, and then be like, I came from Not Safe for Wonks.
Yeah, don't ever go be weird anywhere. Actually. We are not we're weird. We don't endorse you taking weird somewhere.
No, we're professional weirdos. Don't try to get on this level without extensive training.
Do not try this weird at home.
Yeah. Listen, thank you for coming on. Hopefully, come back whenever you feel like it. This has been a great hour, And hopefully we'll do even better next time. So thank you.
This was great. I had a good time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And we're youtube.com/notsafemedia. You can also visit us, the Patreon, patreon.com/notsafe. We do post shows. So if you like this content, you sat here and you listened to this all the way through, it was probably worth something to you. You got a little fun and entertainment out of it. So hey, turn that entertainment into even more entertainment by joining the Patreon. Drop $5. That's like a sub sandwich. This will stick to your ribs all month, and it's very worth it. Patreon.com/notsafe. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Have a great time. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.